This is the Uyuni Salt Flat in the southwestern part of Bolivia.
Amazing. I mean, it just looks like snow. It's a natural wonder.
It's hard to grasp, like it just goes on forever. Like it's just such a cool, like the perspective is so off and it's just really unreal in person.
Imagine taking an overnight bus ride for 10 hours and then the very next night taking another overnight bus ride for 10 hours. What lies in between better be pretty good. We're about to find out. I'm in the town of Uyuni, and today I'm taking a tour of the Uyuni Salt Flat. This is the village of Uyuni. I've heard the name pronounced Uyuni and Uni, but I asked a local woman and she said Uyuni, so that is the pronunciation that I'll use. We arrived at the village 2 to 3 hours before our day full of activity began. That provided plenty of time to wander the streets, look at the artwork, and see the tourism machinery come to life. Around 30,000 people live here. Mining and the railroad were once quite important to the town. Now, tourism is key, and an estimated 60,000 people come through the village each year on their way to the Salt Flat. Just a few kilometers out of town was our first stop on the organized tour. It is a train cemetery. This place is astonishing. The railroad here got its start in the late 1800s. The British were instrumental in creating it. Minerals such as silver and gold were pulled from the land and sent off to other locations. The main connection for the tracks here was a port on the Pacific Ocean. Eventually, the mines no longer produced desirable elements and the train stopped running. That was in the 1940s. Instead of being taken elsewhere, many of the locomotives and cars were brought to this site and left to decay. In the salt environment, that didn't take long, as the metal rusted and corroded over the decades. Now, around 100 pieces are scattered over this small area. The rusted, hulking chunks of metal provide a perfect backdrop for tourists looking to capture unique images. Visitors swarm the area, climbing onto the cars and finding every angle imaginable for their next photo. If you have visions of contemplating the past in solitude as you explore these relics, based on my limited experience, that is not going to happen. Actually, my guess is that at different times during the day, you can have this location almost to yourself. It seems that every tour heading to the Salt Flat makes a stop here to add a little more to the experience. It makes sense for them to do this right at the beginning of the day, so essentially, each of the day's visitors descends upon this place at the exact same time. Even with the crowd, the train cemetery was a blast. I believe that virtually all of the tours of the Salt Flat also stop at the tiny village of Colchani. This village is home to only about 600 people, but it is also the location for the largest salt processing cooperative in Bolivia. There is plenty to see in this spot. From this point forward, you're going to see a theme develop. It's going to all be about salt. This little area is set up to show how the processing of salt is done. This little village has all sorts of things made of salt. It's possible to learn quite a bit here about how raw salt is gathered and refined into the product that ends up on your table. There are all sorts of stations where you can gain some knowledge about various steps in the process. That includes some places outside and even more on the interior. At the end of being educated, there is the opportunity to buy some of the salt that is processed here. Every year, workers within the salt cooperative excavate and refine around 25,000 tons of salt. That comes out to over 68 tons per day. Some of the structures in Colchani are actually built out of the salt blocks. There are plenty of vendors too outside of the processing area. Some of them sell handicrafts formed out of the salt. Textiles are also available made from the wool of llama and alpaca. A small museum of salt is on site. It has just a few exhibits. While in the village, our group had lunch. It was done family style, and I enjoyed a local Uyuni beer with the meal. Next, we began to get a sense for how vast the Salt Flat is. In Spanish, this is called Salar de Uyuni. Our ride across the surface lasted for well over an hour one way. We stopped in several spots along the way, and I'll get to that in a moment. The Salt Flat is just that. There's hardly a bump along the way. The horizon seems to be forever away. This is one of those features on the planet that is so large and so distinct that it is visible from space. Estimates are that there are 10 billion tons of salt in this wide expanse. Another interesting note about this landscape is that under the surface and under all of the salt, there is lithium, the metal which powers so many of the things we own. Somewhere close to 70% of the world's reserves are underground. A relatively short distance out onto the Salt Flat, we came upon a salt hotel. Out front was a compelling display touting Dakar, Bolivia. I had heard of the Dakar Road Rally in the past, but I always associated it with Africa. Seems that it was held in South America from 2009 through 2019 because of security threats on the African continent. Stages over the Salt Flat were popular and provided challenges in terms of navigation and logistics while providing incredible visual appeal. Now to the Salt Hotel. Take a look at this complex. It's called Playa Blanca. Exterior walls, all of the rooms, and even some of the furnishings are made of salt blocks. This is totally wild. It no longer operates as a hotel. There are some places to eat, and it is sort of a museum. But can you imagine staying in a place like this back in the day? A couple of the rooms are still set up just as they were when this facility was welcoming guests. It was such a treat to be able to explore the space and imagine myself staying in a place such as this. Apparently, that is still possible. Several salt hotels are in operation in this area. From what I gather, Playa Blanca was one of, if not the first, salt hotel. It was built about 10 kilometers out onto the flat. Now, hotels are only allowed in towns and spaces that are on the periphery of the flat. A particularly attractive display at the hotel is this pavilion containing flags from around the globe. Here, the wind blows consistently and the flags are always fluttering. Likewise, the color of the banners contrasted against the bright white backdrop creates a magnificent sight. I'm told that you can bring your own flag and add it to the display. This is called a salt desert, but there is a rainy season that lasts from January through March. At times, the salt is covered with a layer of water and produces a mirror effect that is apparently stunning. How great would it be to see that? Mixing the Salt Flat with rain is something you think about out here.
But somehow I wonder what will happen in the rainy season because I heard there's some like water on the salt, but I don't know how the texture will be, so I'm quite curious about that.
In the rainy season, some parts of the flat are not accessible for tours. One of the places you might not get to in the rainy season is Isla Incahuasi. I'm so glad we were able to visit. Incahuasi means House of the Inca. It is essentially an island in the Sea of Salt. This is the remnant of a volcano that was underwater when this was a giant lake eons ago. Now, it rises above the barren salt landscape as one of only a few environmental variations that can be experienced for miles in every direction. The cool thing here is being able to hike to the top of the island over a rocky trail and through vegetation which includes a native species of cactus. The peak is only about 100 meters above the surface below. The way up was actually pretty easy. It took 15, maybe 20 minutes. You just have to watch your step, and the elevation is a factor. But once you get up here, the views are phenomenal. The cost to hike to the top of Isla Incahuasi is 30 Bolivianos, or roughly $4.30. It is just so different than every other place you have seen on the day trip. The trail makes a loop up and down, beginning and ending at the same place. My guide recommended taking a side trail on the way down. It took me to a small area that included a cave and several natural arches. This slight detour from the main path gave the unexpected treat of experiencing a spot just a little different than the rest of the island. Near the bottom of the trail was a small house that showed the way people once lived here. The highlight, however, was when my guide grabbed a pan flute and played a few notes of traditional music. There was a bit of time on the flat at the bottom to reflect on just how amazing it was to be lucky enough to experience this part of the planet. While I'm here, a couple of quick facts about this place. Our guide says that the salt deposit here is 120 meters thick. The salt flat itself is 12,000 square kilometers, making it the largest in the world. And right now, I'm standing at 3,650 meters above sea level. In fact-checking later, the only part of that which needs clarification is the depth of the deposit. 120 meters is fairly accurate, but the salt is in 11 layers, each 2 to 10 meters thick. From Isla Incahuasi, we headed back across the salt flat. It was a fairly lengthy drive, and the purpose was to get in good position for the sunset. Mission accomplished in that regard. As beautiful as the flat had been all day long, getting to see it as the day was coming to an end was next level gorgeous. Everyone grabbed the chance to capture images that they would cherish forever. This spot was appealing because there was water over top of some of the salt in areas, and that enhanced the views even more. My guide pointed out the formation of salt crystals in some of the small pools. Quite interesting to see that. Everyone in our group was intent on making the final moments of the day last as the shadows grew long. Once the sun slipped below the horizon, we were treated to a little wine. The temperature was dropping by the minute, but before we escaped to the relative warmth of our vehicle, there was time for a toast to a day of discovery and wonder. What an amazing day. In a short period of time, we've seen a whole lot of this part of the country, and this salt flat, absolutely magical. I would say that it's worth a couple of overnight bus rides. Thanks for watching Old, Alone, and Far From Home. I will see you next time.
Dejar la soledad, siempre contigo ella está.